Election day is here for the August primary, and we're keeping track of the results. And joining us on our roundtable tonight is Rita Ferrandino, the treasurer of the Sarasota County Democratic Party, and Christian Ziegler, the Republican state committeeman for Sarasota County. This is exciting.
It is.
I mean, we've been talking about this for months. Let's start with the U.S. Senate race on the Republican side. Marco Rubio jumps into the race in June after his failed presidential bid, going up against Manatee's own Carlos Baruf, who dumped millions of dollars of his own money into this race. Christian, it does not look like it will pay off for him.
No, it's a tough race, and I think everyone's saying all signs point to Marco winning this race and winning handedly. But, Carlos is a great guy, and really, if you look at it, before Marco got in the race, he was the front runner, and he had really a good path to victory. But Marco getting in the race changes things, and his name ID and his background, and everyone in Florida knows him. He ran for president, ran for Senate, was House Speaker, so that made it very difficult to overcome.
The Democrats were very excited about this race from the beginning because you had a number of, Carlos Baruf aside, a number of Republicans who were not well known statewide going up against Patrick Murphy, who is obviously well funded, endorsed by the president, the vice president. And they were very enthusiastic about that. But now it seems like a horse race, and the latest polls that I have seen of Murphy versus Rubio, Murphy is trailing by 5 to 8 points.
Well, I think Democrats were nationally very interested in this race because with Marco Rubio running for president, it was going to be an open seat. And in an open seat with a field of relative unknowns on the Republican side, Patrick Murphy really had a strong chance. So that's not what happened. And tonight we're going to see if it's going to be Alan Grayson or Patrick Murphy.
And Alan Grayson is a interesting figure because, look, he is very smart, Harvard educated. He was loved by the progressive community across the nation, and that helped him raise a lot of money early on. But between some of the questions about ethics and his personal life really took a toll on him. In fact, a number of progressive organizations took back their endorsements. The last poll I saw of that race is he was trailing Murphy by about 8 points.
And he remarried a woman the day before qualifying, and she got in the race as Mrs. Grayson to run in his old congressional seat. So it's just been a crazy primary season.
So the question there is, whoever comes out of that primary, assuming it's Patrick Murphy, the congressman from the West Palm Beach area, at this stage, do they have any chance against Marco Rubio? Christian?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you look at Marco Rubio, he's been a U.S. Senator, he ran for president. Obviously, his background, his Cuban background, and that plays well down in Southeast Florida. Marco is a dynamic speaker. He's a dynamic individual. And I don't think when you look at Patrick Murphy, there's a lot of questions about his business background and was he honest with his resume? Was he honest with his positions? And unfortunately, on the Democratic side, we haven't really had a primary because everyone bailed on Grayson. So that has not been fully exposed and discussed. And I think when voters see that, they're going to be shocked and they're going to be disappointed.
But Rubio was trounced by Trump in the presidential primary, and a lot of things came home to roost. There's been a lot of resentment around Florida that it appears that for the last 6 years, Rubio had his sights on the White House and was not keeping in contact, doing the business at home. And a lot of people were wondering, whether that's going to come home and affect him in the Senate race.
There's a lot of very strong public footage that we Democrats have to use against Marco Rubio, so I would not count out Patrick Murphy or Alan Grayson. And I think that it is going to be a very dynamic Senate race this year.
There's another federal race that we should be talking about, and that is which Democrat will win the nomination to go up against Vern Buchanan. We could talk about whether they have a realistic shot at doing that But, you have a newcomer, Brent King, who is a commercial airline pilot. I have met him. I have moderated the debate between him and Jan Schneider. He's an intelligent man, neither of which have raised a whole lot of money, and Jan has run for this office, let's say, numerous times.
So I think that both of those candidates, Brent King and Jan Schneider are running because they really feel that Vern should not get a pass, that he should be held accountable for his votes, and that's just part of making good, strong democracies. And so we applaud that they're both running. We'll see who wins tonight, but Vern does need to have somebody running against him to be able to keep him honest and to make sure that people know what his voting record really is.
Well, that begs the question, why haven't the Democrats targeted this seat? I mean, they did going back to, what, 2006?
We had a very competitive race when Keith Fitzgerald ran against him. And I think that we certainly saw when Christine Jennings ran against Vern Buchanan that it was a very, very competitive race, as you know, it was 350 votes difference.
Those were close races.
They were close races. They were close races.
So you look at, that was at the beginning, and what Vern has done a great job, and again, I worked for Vern Buchanan up in Congress. I know him very well. He's a good friend. He's done a great job of representing the district. So he's been honest with voters. He's been out there. He's communicated with voters. He does town halls throughout the district. He's one of the hardest working members of Congress that you'll ever find on the Hill. And it's interesting because I was a young guy. I was in my mid-20s, and I had a difficult time keeping up with the guy. I mean, he's up 7 in the morning, he's on his bike, and he's working until 3 in the morning, sometimes casting votes. And I think when you look at the Democrats, the reason why, back to your question, you know, why hasn't anyone challenged him? When you look at the Democratic Party here at the local level, they really don't have a bench. They don't have a minor leagues. They don't have players in the game. And you look at that with this primary election in their ballot, they just don't have many contested primaries, and they usually don't even run people in the general election.
We have about 30 seconds left, but I want to ask, given that in the presidential year, Democratic turnout is going to be at its peak, even in districts like this, why is Vern Buchanan so far ahead?
Well, I think that we'll see. We've got 2 candidates running, and we'll see who comes out of that tonight, and we'll see what happens.
If you do a good job in Congress, it pays off, and that's what he's been doing.
Okay. We'll take a break right now, but when we come back, we will have this evening's expert interview. And welcome back to the new hour-long version of ABC 7 at 7. If you are just joining us, it is primary day, and we are tracking the results live with our expert roundtable. We are joined by Rita Ferrandino, the treasurer of the Sarasota County Democratic Party, Christian Ziegler, Republican State Committee man for Sarasota County, and Keith Fitzgerald, the professor of political science at New College of Florida. And when we take a look at some results that are coming in right now, I believe we have 2 races that are in. That is the School Board District 2. As you can see, Caroline Zucker looks like a fairly large lead over Teresa Mast. It's been called by the Associated Press. And why don't we start right there, because this was a really contentious race, and the Republicans are saying that Zucker was a real Democrat, and that Mast was the real Republican. What do you all make of that race?
At the end of the day, Sarasota County is very proud of their schools. The schools work really well, and Caroline Zucker has supported our public schools for a very long time. And I think at the end of the day, it didn't matter if she was a Democrat or a Republican. It's about how she's been doing her job. And clearly the people of Sarasota County believe that she did a good job, and they're sending her back.
Christian, the Republicans were working very hard for Teresa Mast.
No, actually, the Republican Party was on the sidelines in this race, and the reason why is because our internal rules do not allow us to get involved.
But she had a lot of support.
She had a lot of Republican support, absolutely, or Teresa Mast did, because she is a conservative. And what you had is Caroline Zucker. She was supported and endorsed by the local Democratic Party. She was backed by a local PAC that had a bunch of dark money that the liberals always complain about. They spent over $50,000 in dark money on that. The teachers union was behind her, and she had all the Democratic support. She just needed a little bit of the Republican support. And the Republican Party was kind of on the sidelines. So I think it's something that our chairman has even been on record saying that we need to evaluate, because it's not fair for the Republican parties to be on the sidelines when the Democratic Party is going heavy.
I think the truth is there are no such things anymore as nonpartisan races. Is that correct, Keith?
Yeah, I think that's true. Maybe, unfortunately, the case. And I think that there was a major effort on the part of people who are high up in the Republican Party in this race. But I also think that Rita had it right from the outset. People don't want school board elections to be partisan. They want them to be about the schools, and the people in this community generally have strong support
all nonpartisan does is keep voters uninformed. And, you know, when you look at someone's party affiliation, it usually clearly explains where they're at on the issues. So that's why people really do oppose nonpartisan races.
First of all, let's not start this thing by interrupting each other. I was in the middle of a sentence when you broke in there, okay? I mean, let's just have some
Keith, I'm
civil.
just making sure I have time because I have a
Just-
Democratic state committee man and I have a former Democratic chairman. I just want to make sure I have a word in. I thought you were
yeah,
finished.
well, you're interrupting me about interrupting
Okay,
me, so
let's
just
keep
be
it going.
polite.
Is there
Yeah.
something you wanted to finish up there?
Yeah, so I think people in this community generally support the principle of public schools, and there was a real difference on a lot of issues. Let me just say, from an objective standpoint, that name recognition for an incumbent is a major factor in the election, and Carolyn Zuckert has been around for a long time.
I do want to move on to the state Senate race because this is the hottest race that has been around here, and the results that are coming in right now are still early, but it's really interesting because you have a number of Republican all-stars that are in there, including Greg Steube. But it appears right now Nora Patterson is out in the lead in terms of early results. Of course, you also have Doug Holder, and it was really the polls, at least in the last couple of weeks, showed that it was a real battle between Steube and Holder. But Nora Patterson is out with a lead. Is that just because it's early?
It's early. You know, they really started going after Nora Patterson on TV towards the end. So, you know, we still have to wait for the precinct polling to come in. But I think that you're right. I mean, this was a race that was between Steube, Holder going for the conservative vote. You have Nora, who was pretty well funded, going for a little bit more of the moderate vote. With Ray Pilon there, Rick Levine, an outsider, didn't really have many resources. But that one, I think that she's only up by about 200 votes. So I think Election Day polling, when that comes in, we need to wait and see what that actually shows. But it has been a bloody Republican primary, and this is one of those races that you watch, and rather than the results, you're more excited to kind of get it over with and move forward.
And that's because in the fall, we're going to have a general election, and whoever comes out of this is going to be bloodied, and that will be to the Democrats' advantage.
Well, let's talk about the Democratic side of that race, because we have Frank Alcock, the political science professor at New College, and also in his spare time, ABC's 7's political analyst, against Frank Cirillo, who just graduated college last spring, which is terrific. But in the world of politics, nothing is predictable. The early results seem to indicate that Frank Alcock has a lead. Was there any polling in this race, Keith, or is it one of those things that remains a mystery until primary day?
There was some polling, and actually some of the polling I saw actually had the Patterson race and Steube races very, very close between the two of those. So Holder fell back in some of that polling in the last rounds. Alcock had a fairly substantial lead. Looks like it's going to hold up. I would guess he may run just a little bit ahead of the election. But this looks about what the polling said it would. This was a very low information election because neither side did a whole bunch of mass communication.
And it's also not targeted by the Florida Democratic Party, at least yet.
Not yet. People will take a look after the election.
And that leads to a really interesting question, because talking to Frank Alcock, he believes that he has a better chance of winning this race if you have a nominee from the Republican side like Greg Steube or Doug Holder, because there's a bigger difference between conservative and Democrat than if you had a Nora Patterson, who is a moderate Republican.
Well, I think absolutely they're going to be able to draw deep contrast if it's Frank Alcock against Steube or Holder. There's no question. And I think that when people look at what they stand for, Frank Alcock in a general election is going to do very well.
Sarasota County is a Republican county. The Republican Party is fully confident that whoever ends up being the Republican nominee is going to win. The Democratic Party getting involved, that's not going to make any difference. Really, the local Democratic Party, the state Democratic Party, is totally incompetent when it comes to running races, and you can see that by the cabinet being fully Republican, and they failed to take a majority in the state House or state Senate.
Right.
So
But it's a
I'm not
presidential
worried
year.
about that.
It's
I'm
a
not worried about
presidential
that.
year, and there's a different electorate during presidential years.
I was going to say that. You do have maximum Democratic turnout in the presidential year. Frank Alcock is a pretty well-known figure around this area.
Locally, the Republicans, when have they lost a county commission race, a state Senate race? It's been a long time.
We have new lines.
It's not going to happen. The Republican Party, right after this primary, we're going to all get in our headquarters. We're going to work, and we're going to make sure that our nominee wins.
All right, let's talk
And
about
so
one
will
more
we.
race before we get to the break, and that is Steve Vernon against Joe Gruters, who we all know and like. But Christian, you're good friends with Joe Gruters. He was pretty nervous about this primary.
He was, and I actually know Steve Vernon very well as well. He's a good guy. But this is, again, this is like the state Senate primary, just ready to get it over with. But you look at Joe's race, for example, I think Steve Vernon, groups supporting him have spent over $2,000 is what I've read. They've sent out 11 negative mail pieces in the past 8 days. So that is tough to go up against. I fully expect, I mean, you know, Joe has a long history in this area, both in Sarasota and Manatee County, so he should play well. I think everyone's kind of pointing to him as the favorite. But again, we're going to have to wait for the results because that one is a race that I expect to be very close.
And they really beat up Joe Gruters there at the end. The last 2 weeks where they were pretty brutal on Joe Gruters. And, you know, they really threw this whole issue of he's party chair, he's the Trump major supporter and running for office. And so we'll see what happens.
All right, why don't we show some results on the screen of these races as they're coming in. We're going to start with the Sarasota County Commission. Let's see, is it up there? If so, I really don't see it quite yet. All right, there we go. Mike Moran looks like overwhelmingly over Frank Cicero. Any surprises there?
No, I mean, Mike Moran's been running for a long time. He has a lot of support here locally. He raised a lot of funds, so no surprise in that race.
Okay. Let's just talk about the Joe Gruters race just a little bit longer, because it would have been, you know, pretty difficult for the chairperson of the Sarasota Republican Party, the vice chair of the state Republican Party, and the chairman of the Trump campaign to lose in the Republican primary. But this is one of those years that is not predictable. And what's interesting, Keith, is that Steve Vernon was casting Joe Gruters as the insider to his outsider, and you know, Joe is involved in the campaign, in the Trump campaign, which the entire mantra is that Trump is the outsider.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind-bending to think of somebody in charge of the Trump campaign as being an insider. I think the definition of that term doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's definitely true, and I think Vernon's credibility, from what I understand, was largely because of his experience in the Tea Party. Again, hard to characterize Joe Gruters as some mainstream kind of person.
All right, we'll have to take a break there. Welcome back, and we are speaking with our roundtable about tonight's primary. Let's continue on. There's also a very important ballot initiative, the ballot initiative for the solar power amendment, and it looks like, at least locally, has about 75% at least in Sarasota County. Any predictions about what's going to happen statewide, Keith?
My guess is it's going to win. This is one of those things where there's not a whole lot of polling, at least not that I'm aware of. But generally, people support anything that sounds like it's pro-alternative energy. I think maybe more interesting is going to be to see what happens in the second initiative that sounds like it's pro-alternative energy, but many opponents of it believe is actually the opposite.
It confuses a lot of people, because the mantra this week, or in the last couple of weeks, is vote yes on 4, and then in November vote no on 1. Yeah. And it becomes kind of a muddle mess. Christian, we're rounding up our coverage here, so any final thoughts in terms of what you're seeing so far in terms of the results?
No, I mean, you know, we still need to wait on this state Senate race. Obviously, we're looking at Joe's race, Joe Gruters' race in the State House. That'll be interesting to see with the Manatee results coming in. But, you know, I think a lot of it was somewhat expected on the Republican side, at least. And, you know, this is one of those things, it's like primaries are really battles between families. And, you know, you want to do them.
I'd hate to be a member of that family.
Yeah, it's the truth. I mean, but really the battles that you have with your family are sometimes bigger than any battles that you have with anyone else, right? But when you look at this, we're ready to kind of get over with it. And starting tomorrow, the Republican Party will unify. And that's when we turn our eye towards the presidential, and we turn our eye towards making sure that all of our local candidates win. So I know we're all excited to move forward.
Rita, any surprises?
Local bloodbaths are really hard to recover from, as we know, on a local level. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity this presidential year with the Republicans going through this ugly state Senate race. And we're going to see how we can make hay of all of that.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in terms of what impact the presidential race will have, if any, on these local races. You
know, we don't know, but it's going to, I think the big thing we're all in the dark about is turnout. There are arguments that could be made that Trump might increase some turnout. I think it may actually decrease it a little bit. But that's where you have the down ballot effect. And I've been down ballot. You're sort of at the whim of the winds when you're down the ballot, because those turnout differences can make a difference in a close election.
Let me ask you all this question, because the Republican Party has been boasting about the fact that they have really had more voters register as Republicans in the last couple of months than the Democrats have. But there was also a story that came out in Politico the other day that many of those voters were actually former Democrats who simply have not voted Democrat in recent elections.
That is some of it, but I think when you look at Donald Trump, I mean, he's motivated a lot of people to switch their party. I personally know about half a dozen people that live in my area that have switched their party registration and become Republicans. So he's mobilizing people, but when you look at that, 10 counties have flipped from being a majority Democrat to a majority Republican.
Rita, I'll give you the last word.
Here in Florida, we've seen that we Democrats have the majority of voter registration, and that's because we've seen so much minority influence in the elections during presidential years, and they register as Democrats.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming here tonight. It's been very exciting, and we'll be back in a moment with news headlines and an update on the election. We'll be back in a moment.